We're going to talk about ghost stories and strange creatures. And when I did the research for this, I learned things. It was always interesting when you do these things, the amount of information that you learn, because I certainly don't know everything. You know, I'm comfortable with some of the stories, but some of the stuff I didn't know. So we're going to all learn together. But you know, it's blustery outside. It's kind of cold. So the best way to do, ghost stories is usually around a campfire, right? You know, it's nice, warm campfire. It's kind of dark and spooky to set the mood, right? And that kind of thing. So, we need a campfire, don't we? Did anyone bring one? You did. Good thing I came prepared. Daryl Pace, our fabulous museum fellow who does wonderful things, went above and beyond to create this. Now, complete with coffee pot, of course. Now, if everybody holds up your hand and pretend you have a match, and at the count of 3, not before, pretend you're lighting the campfire, okay? Let's see what happens. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Ah! There we go. Okay. Always a showman, right? Okay. The good thing is research, you learn. I never really knew how Ogopogo got his name-o, and now I do, apparently. Any other questions?
Have you ever seen it?
But Ogopogo? Actually, I have, at a distance. When I used to work in at the Courier in Kelowna, I always carried my still camera with me, in case, came across something. And I was up on the, just outside of Summerland, the snaky part that used to be there, and I saw down, because the lake is very, very low at that point, very far down, rather, I should say, there was a group of mud hens, the black birds that grouped together. And they were here, okay, down there. And there was literally a telephone pole swimming towards them. Okay, there was a bit of a wind, but the wind was blowing that direction, and the pole was moving this direction, and was creating a wake. So I thought, well, that's strange. Just missing the corner and pulling over, getting my camera. It only had a 50mm lens. So I took a picture. It said, there. I can see it. Yeah, there it is in there. It's tiny, but I can see it. Took the picture, jumped back in the car. It was film days, okay? Went to work, whatever, months later when you have the film developed. Unfortunately, in the meantime, I told my dad about it. And so he was telling everybody I got a picture of Ogopogo. And I said, wait till the film's developed. When I looked at the film, at the print, all I saw was waves. I could see the mud hens, but I couldn't see any sign of what was coming to them. And the weird thing was, it was a phone pole like this, the size of a phone pole. When it got just before them, it went like this. Just like a submarine would. It didn't bob or whatever, it just went straight down and it was gone. So if technology holds today, we'll all have a good time. So, let's begin. We have our campfire, we're nice and warm. Dennis, if you would, turn out the lights if you please. And we'll start. Oh, yes. There, does that feel warmer? Can you hear the crackle of the Okanagan applewood, seasoned? Let's just go down the road a little ways. Fairview Cemetery. And let's talk about Fairview Cemetery. It's just down here. It's been around for a long time. And if you go in there, it's a nice, peaceful place. But there are people in there that have a great history. Randy Manuel, who's here today, would give tours and about the people and things that are buried there and the things they had. For an example, in the early 1900s, there was a young girl by the name of Minnie who fell off a wagon. And she hit her head on a rock and drowned in a creek. And the unfortunate thing is, she's buried there, of course, because that was the only cemetery around at the time. And people say that at times they see a little girl wandering through in the Fairview Cemetery itself. So go down there, perhaps tonight, when it's dark. Oh, I see. We all have bravery now for the campfire, but going down there. And see if you can see Minnie down there. Front Street. Front Street, that's 1911, Front Street. They've actually not paved the road yet, and the building on the right-hand side actually still exists today, right? So there's several buildings there that were built in the time. The thing is that back then, another spirit that thought to walk the Front Street itself was the jeweler that had a watchmaking and jewelry store down there, Wilhelm Zimmermann. And the reason that he left the earth early because he was actually found dead in his store in 1907. And it was classed as, there's 1907, Penticton Press, as it was known in the day, because it hadn't become the Herald yet, because they called it the Press when they first started. Mr. Zimmerman was discovered by a visitor, stiff and cold and lying on the floor in his tiny back room in a pool of blood. His face was cut in several places, and there was a deep gash on his head. A hand axe covered in blood was near the body. So does that sound like suicide? Yeah, right. Probably not. And if you follow the story in there, Mr. Zimmerman, and that's his store, in the 60s, mind you, but that's what his store looked like. And in the back was the little room where he was found laying there. So they examined the store, and they found that several of the jewelry cases had been opened, and some of the jewelry was missing. Nothing extensive, not all of it, but just some of it. And 2 men were duly arrested for the murder. They were interrogated, but it was found that they had nothing to do with the murder because the times didn't coincide. And so they were free to go. And they weren't duly charged, which is unfortunate, because they never found the jewelry, and to this day, the murder is still unsolved. So again, maybe spirit number 2, if you go down, you brave souls, if you go down to Fairview Cemetery, you might meet Mr. Zimmerman, who's buried in an unmarked grave in Fairview Cemetery, as well as the little girl, Minnie. Maybe you'll meet them both. Perhaps they're visiting, I don't know. So a little further to the north here, coming up this way, there's a small little log home that's there. And it's this one. Well, it's the color version of this one. And Randy told me this story, actually, and the reason he knows about that is because this used to be his childhood home. So he told me the story of Jack with a green hat. So this is just up the street. That's the little log cabin type home that's still standing to this day, okay? And originally built in 1921, the little log house was the childhood home, as I mentioned, of Randy Manuel, who remembers feeling the presence of his dead grandfather, Jack Beaton. Jack was an engineer with the Kettle Valley Railway who had a bad back and liked his whiskey. He also had a very turbulent and abusive relationship with his wife and daughters when he lived at the home. That's Jack, not Randy, okay? I had to clarify that, yeah. His death was also unexpected, as he was found dead in the back bedroom on the morning of January 1st, 1942, after spending a New Year's Eve out for a toot with a friend. The cause was attributed to a mix of painkillers and alcohol. So even back then, they didn't listen. So throughout the following years, Jack was seen by various visitors and family members, usually sitting on the edge of the bed in that back bedroom. Needless to say, no one rested easy in that haunted back room. So we move forward today. This is 2008. That's probably what you remember the house as. If you drive by today, it looks somewhat similar, just wearing its winter coat today. More recently, the house was sold to a new family. The new owners contacted Randy and asked if he knew of any strange happenings in the house. Of course he would. He went there and spoke with the family and discovered that it was their 4-year-old daughter who had seen a man with a green hat, who used to sit on the side of the bed and tell her stories. That would be a little creepy, wouldn't it? Okay. Apparently he was a friendly man. Randy left, but said he would return later. So later in the day, he came back with several group photographs, each one containing Jack and several other men in the images, okay? The little girl was able to pick out Jack in each of the photos, but asked the question, why is the hat gray? It's a green hat he wears. Her mother told the little girl that they didn't have color pictures in the old days. With that, the little girl went outside to play. Randy then went into the back room and told Jack in no uncertain terms, and I won't use the language he did, to leave the house as it was no longer his. So far to this day, Jack has not been re-seen again, so he's on his way. But can you imagine, the little girl was actually able to pick out Jack in each of those images. So that's interesting. Why do ghosts and demons get along? Because demons are a ghoul's best friend. I don't write them, I just tell them, okay? Did you hear about the guy who couldn't keep up his payments to the exorcist? He was repossessed. See, they get better, okay? And down at the Sicamous, it's also thought that Captain Joseph Weeks, one of the last captains of the SS Sicamous and founder of the Okanagan Historical Society, never left the ship. He spent so much time there, of course, that he decided to stay on even after it was berthed. So others who work on the ship often hear, they say they hear footsteps of Captain Joseph Weeks walking the upper decks back and forth. Doors open and close, and people who take pictures often see strange images in the distance. So go down there tonight if you don't want to do the graveyard. Go down to the Sicamous, okay, and have a look. So Captain Joseph Weeks is down there on the ship. And there he is. If you look in the upper deck, you'll see him in the upper right there. Okay. Another sad tale that happened. Again, a lot of the information comes from the Penticton Herald, which is a really wonderful source of research material that we use on a regular basis in the archives, and we're very lucky to have that. So I get to read a lot of the news, and if I could speed read, man, I'd know the entire history of everything for the last 100+ years. So one of the stories here that came out was about Constable Jeffrey Aston, and unfortunately, Constable Jeffrey Aston was shot and killed while escorting 2 robbers, suspected robbers, well, they were suspects actually, on the way to Kelowna, Walter James and Frank Wilson, aboard the SS Okanagan, when it made a scheduled stop in Peachland on March 19, 1912. Constable Aston was shot. And the way it happened was that, unknown to Aston, James had hidden a small .22 caliber pistol under his arm, just up here, next to the skin that was missed during the search when they were arrested. Right, so there's the Okanagan. And so he didn't see that little tiny revolver that he had secreted upon himself. So, as they approached Peachland, James distracted Aston by asking for a drink of water. When Aston turned around, he was staring at the pistol with orders to put his hands up. When he refused to do so, James shot him in the head and the 2 escaped. It's just a small gun, okay? The shooting was quickly discovered, and Aston was quickly sent to the hospital in Kelowna, where he clung to life, mainly because of the location of the bullet was lodged in the back of his skull. It hadn't exited, and they couldn't operate. So he just lingered. Meanwhile, a valley-wide manhunt involving 200 armed men was made for the outlaws, who were finally captured. Unfortunately, Constable Aston lingered for several days, but finally died from his gunshot wounds at the May Assizes in Kelowna, with the cooperation from Frank Wilson, the other captive. Walter James was found guilty of murder and hung in August of 1912. They had a necktie party for the man, okay? That adds a bit of fun to it, doesn't it? Okay. So there's the 2 gentlemen there, Aston on the left and James on the right. He looks a bit like a bully. Like a little bit of arrogance mixed in, just a young fellow too, so sadly. So, but as a reminder, as a memento for the occasion, let's say, there's a special marker for Jeffrey Aston has been placed at Fairview Cemetery, marking the 100th anniversary of his tragic death. And by the way, the original robbery that James was found guilty of as well was out of Okanagan Mission store, and it netted only $15. So a man's life was forfeit for $15, and that's all. Not a hefty price. So it's said that down again at the SS Sicamous area there, that Constable Aston still haunts the stern saloon section of the SS Okanagan, because that's the ship he died on. So as you go down to see Weeks, you can step over and listen for Aston, because he's probably there. Now, in this building here, there's been an odd occurrence. That's the, shortly after the opening, that's 1969, as a matter of fact, when I was just a wee lad. So here in the museum, some years ago, well, a man, while sorting through a collection in the back room, saw a little girl out of the corner of his eye. He was surprised to see the young child, aged 7 or 8, and asked around if there was a little girl visiting at the time. All of the staff said no. They hadn't seen anyone. But it's not surprising, perhaps, that what he saw was not actually a person, but perhaps a spirit, simply because the girl was never identified, and the current museum building is built on top of the former location of the Penticton Primary School. It was a primary school, then it was the only school, then it was a high school in later years. Okay? Originally built in 1909. So perhaps the young girl is still waiting to go home from school after some tragic event. And there she is. Now, let's get on to one of the stories that I have personal first-hand knowledge in this one, because it happened to myself and my father when we were up visiting on the day. Dad and I used to go out to ghost towns and that kind of thing because we just loved the history of it all. And we were out in the afternoon driving my Jeep without the top on because it was August the 7th of 1984 when we went up to Eleanor Lake area. Chute Lake, you all know where Chute Lake is? Eleanor Lake is about 3 miles beyond with a really, really bad road. Has anyone driven there? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. It's really pothole, okay? But the interesting thing is Eleanor Lake's kind of neat because it has these floating islands that don't walk on them because you'll sink. It's just a collection, a mass of old roots and that kind of thing that are there. But there's also a little waterfall at the north end of that, and that's where the road goes and up, and it continues on actually up to Big Meadow Lake. Now the interesting thing is Dad and I had gone up there, and I know that was a date because it was my brother Wayne's birthday, and we were going to go down to his house later on and have a party. So I know it was about 11:30 in the afternoon. It was August the 7th. I know the date and the time and all that kind of thing because of the events that happened. Now this area that we backed up into, we were driving along the main road and then we backed into this little sort of offshoot. So here's the main road and there was like a T intersection, and this little road that we backed into went up against the creek so that you couldn't go any further back. It was just the creek itself. And the creek was flowing, the birds were singing, it was a lovely day. We had stopped to have lunch. So I'm standing there peeling my orange, Dad is about 10 feet in front of me. And something strange happened. The way the setup of that little road is that it was almost like it was carved out of the trees. So very small trees, okay, and an alleyway. So you can't see the main road that goes over there because of the trees that are set up. So it gives you a little window of view at the very end of the main road, okay? And then something really strange happened. The creek behind me, it's a lovely day. Like I say, the birds were singing, the creek was babbling, and just on the left-hand side in my view, a horse on a rider came by and into view. The second that happened, the birds went away. The creek sound vanished. It was as if someone had taken the volume control and turned it down, okay? First, there was one rider, behind was a second, then a third, fourth, and finally a fifth. At one time, there was 5 riders on horseback at that point in that little viewing window. And the strange thing is, because I do video and photography, I'm very detail-oriented. So I noticed, first of all, the sound was gone. I thought, that's strange. And then I start looking at the people. There was an older man, perhaps a father, a younger man, first son, younger man still, second son, a young girl, perhaps a daughter, and then an older woman, perhaps the wife. So perhaps a family out for a ride, I thought. Very nice. But I looked at the detail of the people. They had pants on, of course, all of them, including the women, but they weren't jeans. They were cotton pants. They had shirts, but they were cotton shirts. They had suspenders. They had boots, but not modern boots. They were older leather boots, okay? Knee-high boots, riding boots. They had backpacks, but they were not nylon. They were canvas. The horses' harnesses and everything were very plain, very simple. No sparklies, no silver accoutrements. So very simple, plain folk. And that image immediately made me think, they're in the wrong time period. They had felt hats. And Dad, being friendly, and about 10 feet in front of me from where I was standing, I'm standing beside the Jeep with no top, they looked over at us with as much awe as we were looking at them. We both seemed to be surprised at each other. And Dad, being friendly, said, "Hi." And the man looked over and said, "Howdy," put his hand to his hat, and then continued to ride on. Now, the way the road is set up there is that from that point of that little window, it continues on for about 50 feet, turns the corner, and then continues on for at least another 50 to 75 feet before it disappears behind the trees and continues on to Big Meadow Lake, which is part of the watershed for Naramata. Okay? When these horses went by, and I'm watching them, and they're on the dirt, gravelly road, you can hear the horse hooves. I'm thinking, okay, and I'm scanning these people, and away they went. Okay. Just as the last rider passed out of view, that's when someone turned the sound back up on the creek behind me. And I went, ooh, that was creepy. And I looked and I thought, and I said to Dad, I said, that was strange. And he said, what? So I walked out onto the roadway, and I stood there, and I looked. They should be about there. There was just a slow gait the horses were doing. They weren't there. Okay, they should be. They weren't there. They were nowhere in sight in that area. They shouldn't have gone that far. And there's no other road to take, and they didn't go off through the unmarked bush. They were following a trail. And then I said to my dad, I said, what did we just see? And he said, people on horseback. I said, okay. I said, how many feet does a horse have? He laughed. I said, no, be serious, come on. He said, 4. And I said, good, how's your math? How many people went by? And he said, 5. I said, how many horses' hooves just went past? And he said, well, 20. I said, good, come here. He said, what? I said, come here. And so he stood beside me on the road, and I said, what do you see? He said, well, I don't see anything. I said, 20 horses' hooves just went on this road, and you don't see anything. Doesn't that tell you something? I went like this, dumped my boot in there. There's my footprint. I saw the Jeep tracks, clear as day, undisturbed, but no horses' hooves. Do I want to go back to that spot? No. Let's go today. It's all changed up there because of the logging and stuff that happened up there. But so there's some strange things that happen up in that area, not only at Eleanor Lake, but down at Chute Lake as well. Mentioned in Ghosts 2 by Robert Baylock. There's several people that have put out ghost books, Ghosts in British Columbia, and I've pulled some of this information from those books as well. So Robert Baylock tells of that story because he phoned me in an interview and wrote the details. So if you want to reread that, it's in that book. But one of the other ones he talks about is a story that centers around Chute Lake area. A young man by the name of Kevin McDermott, okay, came from Scotland to get in on the British Columbia gold rush. He helped to build the Dewdney Trail from Hope to Princeton. Unfortunately for McDermott, a powder blast in 1860 took his left leg off. So he's a one-legged piper. And his name became Eileen. No. At least you caught it, that's good. Anyway. So although his employment prospects are now limited, he was a resourceful man and soon built a homestead in the Chute Lake area. So now remember, we're talking 1860s, so it's way back, okay? There's not much around, not even in Penticton. It would be later than that because there wasn't even Penticton then. So much later than that. When his home was complete, he sent for Scotland for his wife, and the couple eked out a living in this isolated spot. McDermott's great joy was to play his bagpipes he had brought with him. When he could spare the time, he would go up into the hills and play the old Scottish tunes that he and his wife loved so much. Not many people heard McDermott's playing, for few endured the difficult ride on horseback to Chute Lake. The price of their isolation was made clear when McDermott's wife suddenly became ill. She was much too sick to move, and her only hope for McDermott was to pay for the cost of bringing a physician in from Princeton. McDermott collected the money that he could, but it was not enough. He had to watch her die, slowly and in pain, from no medical help. After her death, McDermott was rarely seen. When time had passed without word from him, his neighbors became increasingly concerned, and a few men made their way along the rough trail leading to his homestead. They found that his cabin was deserted. Outside the door was the body of his horse, still tethered to the hitching post. On the hill some distance from his cabin, his neighbors found his much-loved bagpipes. But there was no sign of Kevin McDermott, no sign of his wife's grave. It is said that in the Chute Lake area, on a clear night, you may hear the chanting of McDermott's pipes. And if you happen to be in the right spot when the moon is full, you may even catch a glimpse of the man himself, atop a hill, playing his melancholy tunes to his long-lost love. Who wants to go to Chute Lake? No. Don't blame you. So, a skeleton walks into a bar and says to the bartender, "I'll have 2 beers and a mop." Not too fast on the pickup. 2 beers and a mop, okay? He's a skeleton, okay? Think about it. Now you get it, okay. Takes a while. Dear, oh dear. What do you call the ghost of a chicken? A poltergeist. Okay, that one you got faster. Good for you, okay. Too much fun, too much fun. Okay. Another interesting book, Penticton and Area Secrets and Surprises, has some ghost stories in it. The locations of the stories they mention are not specific, so there's no addresses. Probably because they don't want people coming knocking on their door and said, you know, I heard your house was haunted, I want to have a look, okay? So they mention there's houses on, you know, Middle Bench Road and that kind of thing. So if you want a good read for a thing, there's a book to pull some information from. But they do mention this one, and the reason I chose this one is because I knew the owners, okay? I knew Tish and Tiny that lived there. So that's from 2009, because the house is no longer there. But there's other things that possibly are still there to this day. So this involves a small little house originally built in the 1900s. It was once at the north end of Winnipeg Street. So it's like right by the beach, if you want to look for it. The owners had inherited this charming house from the husband's mother. When they moved in, the mother, whom we shall refer to as Grandma, was still alive. Grandma's boarder, who lived in a small self-contained room upstairs, stayed on as well. That little A-frame top, that's the room he was in. Sadly, one day, the boarder's body was discovered in the small upstairs room. Apparently, he had died from a heart attack the previous day. It happened that a friend of the old gent came by to see him. Grandma's son went up to the room to tell the boarder that he had a visitor, but the man didn't answer the door, leaving the son to believe he had gone out. The visitor went away, and after trying to reach his friend by telephone for several hours, returned to the house and spoke once more to the son, telling him of his concern for his friend. This time, the son went into the room, and there he found the man laying on the floor. By the appearance of the room, it's believed that the boarder had just prepared his evening meal when the heart attack occurred, for laying on the floor next to him was utensils. Later, when sitting in the living room, one could occasionally hear the sound of utensils dropping to the floor in the far corner of the room and the ceiling above. Grandma has since passed on as well. The son and daughter-in-law remained in the house. The two also believed that Grandma's spirit also lingered. Prior to her death, Grandma went to bed very early at night. Arising later, her son and daughter-in-law would hear her shuffle into the kitchen to make a cup of tea and some toast for a snack. And in the evening after Grandma's passing, when her family was watching television, the quiet shuffle of bedroom slippers could be heard going to the kitchen. Neither of them were alarmed or surprised. They simply sensed that Grandma had gone for her midnight snack. So today, that's the building that's there now. You remember seeing that one? Okay. I often wonder, I think it's businesses below, perhaps living quarters above. If anyone's interested, please go there and ask. Do you ever hear utensils being dropped? Or do you hear the shuffling of bedroom slippers? The house may be gone, but perhaps Grandma and the boarders live on, okay? Who knows? So let's look at some strange creatures in the Okanagan. So we'll get away from ghost stories for a while, for there are some odd creatures around. So this fellow here, that's a 1937 picture here in the archives of Ogopogo, okay? Could be real, could be a publicity shot, I'm not sure, okay? But let's touch on a little Ogopogo history first, being as he's right around, he or she is right around here. So, the very first occurrence and documented sighting of Ogopogo was by pioneer Susan Allison in 1872. Although John McDougall, no relation, had blamed the creature for drowning a team of horses in Okanagan Lake 12 years earlier. Because that happened often. And in fact, the native people called Ogopogo at the time the spirit of the lake, not lake demon or anything like that. And I won't dare try the pronunciation of it and insult them. So, but you may well ask, so how did Ogopogo get his name?
How did Ogopogo get his name?
Thank you, Chandra. At least let's try that. You may well ask, how did Ogopogo get his name?
How did Ogopogo get his name?
I'm glad you asked. And this is how. According to the research that I found, there was a British music hall hit called The Ogopogo, the funny foxtrot, written in 1924 by Cumberland Clark and Mark Strong, and made famous by the entertainer Davy Burnaby. Okay, so that's supposedly the Ogopogo there, but not quite the lake creature we have. But it was a mythical creature, okay? And I thought you would love to hear and sing along the lovely little ditty. So there are the words, and I will play the song, and feel free to sing along, because I know once you hear the song, it'll be in your head for the next 3 days.
One fine day in Hindustan, I met a funny little man with googly eyes and lantern jaws, an old silk hat and hairy paws. When I said to that sweet old chap, why do you carry that big thing of fat, the butterfly net and rusty gum? He replied, listen here, my son, I'm looking for the Ogopogo, the funny little Ogopogo. His father was a pollywog, his father was a whale. I'm going to put a little bit of salt on his tail. I want to find the Ogopogo while he's playing on his old banjo. I just want to take him back home where I'll take him, and then I will make him the sensation in a Broadway show.
That's a silly song, isn't it? But actually, people paid money to go see those plays, you know? Anyway. So, at a luncheon held in Vernon in August of 1926, an entertainer by the name of Mr. Brimblecombe sang a parody of that song. The lunch guests were members of the Vancouver Board of Trade, the Vernon Board of Trade, and the Vernon Rotary Club. They thought the performance was perfectly delightful. And the next day, a reporter in the province newspaper wrote about the event, and the name Ogopogo stuck. So that's how Ogopogo got his name, okay? If you believe it, but there you go. Makes for a good story. Oh. So why did the ghost go into the bar? For the booze. I didn't say they were good, they're just cute, okay? And they're clean, every one of them, so that's good. How do ghosts keep fit? By exercising regularly. Exercising, huh? They liked it. Okay. Moving on. Yes, there's strange things in the Okanagan Lake. This story comes from the book Milestones in Ogopogo Land by Chess Lyons. Interesting book, if you can get your hands on it, read it. It goes mile by mile from hope to here and tells you the historical events along the way, which is quite good. According to the book, in 1914, several people were camped along the beach near Greta Ranch, just up the road here still. The late Mr. F.M. Buckland of Kelowna tells it this way. One of our party, who had gone down to the lake's edge for water, was attracted by a strong smell of rotted fish. On investigation, he found the badly decomposed body of a strange animal laying on the water's edge. He described his find as something that had never been seen or heard of in these parts before. The body was between 5 and 6 feet in length and could weigh about 400 pounds. It had a short, broad, flat tail and a head that stuck out from between shoulders without any sign of neck. The nose was stubby, sticking out of a rounded head, with no ears visible. The thick hide was sparsely covered with a silky hair 4 and 5 inches in length and of a bluish-gray color. While the teeth resembled those of a dog, it had 2 ivory-like tusks and claws resembling those of a great bird on flipper-like arms, claws that showed no sign of wear or use, such as though found on a cougar or other land animal. That sounds pretty weird. For many years, and according to this is a true story, for many years the shoulder blade, the ivory-like tusks, and great claws were exhibited to interested persons, but now this strange episode of the what's it has been almost completely forgotten. So could that have been the Ogopogo of years gone by? It should be mentioned that the Indians once related to how Squally Point was the home to little people. These strange creatures of the waves, with rounded heads, staring eyes, and hair that floated about them, nursed their young while rocking on top of the water. The form and habits attributed to these mysteries are remarkably similar to that of the manatee, an animal of the quiet rivers of southern Florida, the West Indies, and western Africa. Is it possible that manatees also once inhabited Okanagan Lake? It's possible. Anything's possible. Known in this area as Stenwicken, and in other areas as Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or Men of the Mountains. There's a story that comes from Hester White, told to her by a native friend of hers called Susap. So this story was told to me by an Indian called Susap. He was a wonderful man, and I was proud to call him friend. In 1872, as a young man, he went to work for Mr. Barrington Price near Kiramias. In 1888, he came to work for my father, Judge Haynes, at Asuyas. He helped with the cattle and served as a guide and packer when we journeyed over the Hope Trail to the coast. He came to see me one Christmas in Penticton and related the following tale. Stenwicken, the hairy giant who smelt as of burning hair, left large tracks near the Indian caches from which he helped himself to the dried meat, fish, roots, and berries stored for the winter. He was often seen at the mouth of the creeks catching fish. He was peaceful-minded and never harmed the Indians. However, one day in the long ago, at berry time, a young Indian maiden disappeared. It was feared that Stenwicken had carried her away. After a long time, she returned to her tribe with the following tale. Stenwicken had seized her and carried her to a large cave, the floor of which was covered with skins of bear, deer, mountain sheep. She was given roots and berries, dried fish, and meat to eat, and was not molested or harmed in any way. But a large stone was rolled across the mouth of the cave, making her a prisoner. When alone, she made moccasins from some of the hides, hoping somehow to escape. One night when the moon shone bright, she noticed that the stone was not quite tight in the cave's mouth, and she slipped out. After traveling many miles, and for a long time, she again found her people. The cave in which Stenwicken is supposedly to have lived was near Princeton. Miners on the way to Fraser goldfields sometimes hid in the cave, and when they feared the Indians. A.E. House had a general store in Princeton and used the cave to store his merchandise. Before the Hope-Princeton Highway was built, the mouth of the cave could be seen from the Kettle Valley train. A Japanese working at the mine in the north of the railway was awakened one night when something brushed against his tent. Thinking it was his employer, he went out the door, and there stood Sten Wicken with his hands out, making a sign for something to eat. He was given food, and he left. Again, near Lumbee, Sten Wicken came to a tent with hands out asking for food, leaving peacefully when satisfied. No doubt the Sasquatch of Harrison Lake and Sten Wicken of the Okanagan are one and the same. As he has done no harm, he deserves consideration and his freedom to roam at will. So if you don't want to go to this cemetery or the sycamores, you can go out in the bush after dark, and maybe you'll put some. Now, we've all had some treats, so it's time for a trick. Okay? And the reason for that, Harry Houdini, master of escape, a magician first, then an escape artist later. He died of a ruptured appendix, something that most people don't know about. They think he died in one of his tricks. He didn't. It was a ruptured appendix that took him out. He died at 1:26 p.m. on October 31st, 1926, in Detroit Grace Hospital. He was only 52. So, it is customary for magicians all over the world to honor the memory of great Houdini by performing a free magic show for the public on Halloween. And I've done that myself in the past. As a fellow magician, and as we only have a little time left, I can't give you an entire show, but we do have time for one trick. Who would like to see it? I didn't hear you. Okay. Could I have the lights, please, Dennis? So let's get a couple of assistants. Dennis, if you would, please. My lovely assistant. He said, don't call him my lovely assistant, so I said, no, I won't call you my lovely assistant. But thank you for volunteering. And Carol, if you would come up, please. Don't be afraid. Stand, no. You stand here, yeah. And you stand here. Actually, we'll cheat this way for the camera. So back up. There you go. There, we'll do this, okay? Everyone still see? Maybe back up just a tad. Okay. Watch out for the trap door, okay? I'll give you this to look at. This is my, I used to go out for candy. I could haul a lot of stuff in there. So I'll take 20s and loonies, and I didn't think so. Cheap lot. Okay. Have a look in there. Make sure there's no trapdoors, no midgets, no hidden elephants, no lock picks specifically. Nothing there. Turn it inside out if you like. There shouldn't be any underwear in there either, because I think I emptied it. If there is, we'll make it brief. Okay. So let me do this. Oh, he doesn't believe me. He doesn't trust me. That's okay. I know me, and I wouldn't trust me either, so. Here. And put that there. You could have brought your own locks, folk. Anyone have their own locks on them? No, I didn't think so. Good thing I came prepared. But you could have, okay? So, oops. So I'm going to put the keys right there, okay? And Dina, you keep an eye on those, okay? Don't let me get near them, okay? So we have here, it's a steel bar, okay? It's solidly welded. You can bite on it if you want, okay? And we have chains, okay? That's what it is. So, what we're going to do is, Dennis, if you would take the first lock. The reason I roll up my sleeve is so that you can see there's nothing up my sleeves. That old trick, okay? Just to make sure. Because people around here just don't trust me. So if you would lock that, please, Dennis. See how he does. Ah. And make sure it's severely locked. It's not a gimmick lock, it's a real lock. You could have brought your own, okay? And Carol, if you'd put that on either side of my wrist, yeah? Now, I don't have a pool big enough to dive into, okay? So we'll do this on dry land. And I'm not going to hang upside down with a straitjacket. In fact, you know how hard it is to get a straitjacket these days? Because once you go in, you usually don't come out, okay? So if you would, between the two of you, hold the bag, yeah? Right. Huh, that's perfect. You checked it all, right? You know, there's nothing in there? You're sure? These guys don't believe you, okay? So I'm going to put my hands in, and you can kind of close it up, and you have to face the, no. Just keep it slightly apart, right? And look at the audience, because they're your, no, you have to turn this way, okay? The audience is out, no, don't get too far apart. I can't get out of here, okay? Okay, so you got to look there, okay? You're doing good. You're doing good. Okay. You caught on to this yet? No, you haven't yet. Let's see. What can? Oh, down a little. Down a little. Yeah, down a little, because it's really hard to get out of these things if you hold it up too high. Okay. I mean, these. You checked the locks, right? You did. Yeah. Okay. They're locked. Yeah. Okay. You know where are the keys, Dina? They're right there, right? Good. Okay. That's good. That's good. Okay. So. And it's not even over yet. This is wonderful. So, you like this. How long can we go on? Pretty long if you want, but I think what we'll do is we'll call it a night. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, so much.